Hello and welcome to Viewpoint. I'm Vladimir Solokhub. During March 21st, 23rd, a number of security experts gathered in Kyiv for a seminar for the representatives of the government of Ukraine on defense and security reforms. Joining me now to discuss the defense reforms in Ukraine is Colonel Ted Donnelly, Chief of Black Sea Eurasia Division, Policy and Strategy Directorate of U.S. European Command. Colonel, welcome to Viewpoint.
Thank you.
So, Colonel, you were the only speaker during this seminar on the session on challenges to defense reforms in Ukraine. So, can you tell us, what are these challenges?
Absolutely. I'd like to, well, first, a minor correction. I was not the only speaker.
Okay.
My counterpart from the Ukrainian General Staff also presented on the panel, and we answered questions together. If I can answer that question by first going back about 15 years. I've been coming to Ukraine for about 15 years, on and off in different capacities, working issues of defense reform. It certainly picked up a lot in the past 2 years. And 2 years ago, next month, so April 2014, with Ukraine, we formed a new organization for Ukraine called the U.S. Ukraine Joint Commission on Defense Reform and Bilateral Cooperation. That is a forum for, as the name would indicate, discussing and more importantly acting on issues of defense reform and cooperation. So I actually lead the executive committee of this body, and what we do is we, working with our Ukrainian partners, we develop requirements, validate the requirements, and then prioritize the requirements, and then in certain cases seek out assistance, solutions, financial assistance, intellectual assistance, advising, training, that kind of thing. So that's the background, and that's why I was on this panel. So we've been doing this pretty heavily for the past 2 years through this joint commission, which initially it was U.S. Ukraine, and it was bilateral cooperation.
Yeah, so obviously with the war in eastern Ukraine, the cooperation must have increased.
We formed it in April of 2014 specifically in response to Crimea and the various different requests we were getting for assistance from Ukraine, and we felt like we needed to really develop a system and a process to make sure that we were, for our sake and for the sake of Ukraine, that we were really giving the best expert advice to both the Ukrainian side and to our own leadership in Stuttgart and Washington. Now, along the way, in short order, we picked up several allies. So this is now the multinational joint commission. We have the United Kingdom as part of this group, Canada, and most recently Lithuania. So now we're 5 countries all in this together, and we changed the name to the Multinational Joint Commission on Defense Reform and Multilateral Cooperation. So that's what brought me to Kyiv this time in this capacity, and that's why they put me on this panel, Challenges to Defense Reform.
So, Colonel, again, if we're talking about this seminar, about the discussion, about your presentation,
yes.
In your opinion, what are the main challenges the Ukrainian defense reform is now facing?
So, shortly after we formed this organization, which consists of, roughly 50 to 75 initially American and now American and allied personnel in experts in functional areas, ground forces, air forces, naval forces, special forces, medical, logistics, and several other areas. First thing we did was we came to Ukraine and multiple times, and we did comprehensive hands-on assessments in those different areas. That was like a fact-finding mission. So determine the facts on the ground and then see what was needed. Now, the common thread that went through all of these different functional areas and all of our different subcommittees was institutional training. That was the theme. That was the biggest deficiency, and that was what really tied all the different disparate areas together, was really lack of an institutional training capacity and capability in the Ukrainian armed forces. So identifying that as our #1 challenge and our #1 priority, and this at the time was bilateral, Ukraine agreed with us. They've bought in on this, the General Staff and the Ministry of Defense. So we identified that.
Excuse me for interrupting, but I understand
Certainly.
this is something which is already being tackled. There
Yes.
are various trainings, various countries, U.S. troops, Canadians.
Yes.
They're all training Ukrainian National Guards, armed forces. This is being tackled. What are the issues which have not been resolved?
Well, that is the number one issue, and it's not resolved yet.
But in the process,
it is a very large problem set. It will take some years to develop that system. I think we're off to a very good start. But what we are trying to develop here in Ukraine through the Joint Commission and through the Joint Multinational Training Group Ukraine, which is a subordinate training element that you're obviously familiar with, is to really develop the capacity in Ukraine so the Ukrainian military can train itself without Allied assistance, without Allied support, that can generate forces, regenerate forces in perpetuity. So that's what we're working towards. And we're not finished yet. It is a big problem. It is a hard problem to tackle. It's even harder to do it when you're in the middle of a war. So this will take us some time, but we're attacking it very aggressively.
Again, apart from the lack of training, what are the other areas where Ukraine defense area sector needs improvement?
That's the primary area.
And
you fix the training, you fix everything else.
What about the equipment? What about the weaponry? Does Ukraine have enough capacity with the level of training they're supposed to get or receive from various partners? With that level of training, is there enough technical possibility to defend the territory of Ukraine?
Well, the most powerful weapon in Ukraine's inventory is right up here. It's the brain power of every Ukrainian and every soldier, and that is immense. And the full
you can't
effect.
Stop the tanks with the brain power.
Well, you can't stop it with your brain, obviously, but you can with tactics. You can with tactics. There are ways to stop tanks. It's been done before. And again, this is all based on our assessments, that we did, that we've done continuously over the last 2 years, but starting summer of 2014, and we said training ties it all together. You fix the training, you fix everything else. Ukraine needs a lot of things, no doubt. We are focused on the training, and specifically the training of the Ukrainian trainers. So our intent is not to train every single Ukrainian. Our intent is to train some of them, but really to train a cadre of leaders and to really give Ukraine a modern, Western, NATO standard training system. So it's a systemic approach.
Both U.S., Canada, and other Ukraine's Western partners were providing Ukraine with military humanitarian assistance. There were military vehicles, there were first aid kits.
Yes.
Is there more need in stuff like that?
Yes, absolutely.
And what are the primary needs then?
Well, Ukraine's at war. So I think really across the board, there are significant materiel needs. Most of them, it is well within the capacity of Ukraine to get after and provide for themselves. We have agreed bilaterally and also multilaterally with our allies. We each have our bilateral programs, but then we also have the Multinational Joint Commission that we're going to focus on the training.
In the course of your mission, of your assessment mission, have you discovered any other problems within the Ministry of Defense itself? Are there any needs to reform the Ministry of Defense? Because within the Ukraine, the Ukrainians, there are a lot of complaints, especially from the soldiers who have been in the East, who have been in the war zone, who come back, and they say it's not working because these generals are sitting in Kyiv. They're cut away from reality. They're far away from reality. Something has to be changed. And the guys who are sitting in Kyiv, these old school generals, they're much more concerned for their careers and their offices rather than running the battle effectively. Do you see the same problem within the structure of the Ministry of Defense?
Well, we definitely see, again, a need for training. And training is not just training the individual soldier how to shoot, move, and communicate. That's a big part of it, but it's also training leaders. And leaders go all the way from, that sergeant, team leader, all the way up to the generals. So, and this is a training system. It's a systemic approach that we're taking. So, yeah, we think across the board there is a great need for training system reform, and we think that will get at a lot of the leadership issues, the operational issues. Again, Ukraine has immense human capital. in terms of the quality of the soldiers that you have, the intellectual capacity of people in your military, but also Ukrainian society. So the raw materials are definitely there. We just need to modernize the training. Now, what we've come up against is it's tough. It's very hard to change your training system. We did it in the United States after the Vietnam War. It took the experience of Vietnam for us to really change the way we trained ourselves. And we've been pretty effective with that. We like that model. We are presenting that model to Ukraine, not to say that they need to do it the American way, but this is a proven successful model that we are showing them that can be tailored and adapted to the Ukrainian reality, keeping in mind also that the president has said he wants his military trained to NATO standards. So we're in NATO. We know the NATO standards. We have our NATO allies. Now, it is tough. You know, there's the American proverb, and I'm sure there's an equivalent Ukrainian proverb about teaching an old dog new tricks. It's very difficult. So if you have someone that grew up in the old system, in the Soviet system, it's very hard to convince those people of the value of a different way of doing things. But I would say the motivation, you really only have to look east for the motivation, because even the Russian military, the Spetsnaz forces and the VDV, they've really cast off the old Soviet model, and they're doing things differently. So I would argue that is you know, there's a need for Ukraine as well to also adapt its training systems to the modern world, and we're trying to help with that and show a model that has worked very well for us and that we believe could be adapted with some minor changes for Ukraine across the force.
Colonel Donnelly, you said that you recognize there is a need to train the senior military officials within the Ministry of Defense. Are there any programs already in place to train these old dogs?
Well, I mean, I've said we need training from the privates all the way up to the generals and everyone in between. So I'm not singling anyone out. We have some excellent training programs.
Because we've seen the programs for the ordinary soldier. We've seen the programs for medics. It's all across the news. Right. I've been there myself on observing the training several times. I haven't seen Ukrainian generals being trained by
We have some excellent. Thank you for that question. This is something I talked about yesterday on the panel. We have some excellent programs in the United States and some that we've brought here, and also in our NATO allies as well, to train leaders at all levels and to train senior leaders. In my personal opinion, and based on what I've seen over the last 2 years working with the Joint Commission, these programs are underutilized. So we have the budget to send Ukrainian leaders to the United States for U.S. military training in our schools, same schools I went to, same schools all of our generals went to. That is the biggest budget in Europe.
By saying that you have the capability, you mean that it's just the capability and this is not being utilized right now by Ukraine?
It's being underutilized, and it's perhaps not being optimally utilized. So we doubled Ukraine's schools budget to attend our schools. We doubled that last year. We have trained since 1994. We've trained over 1,000 Ukrainian military officers in our schools. Now that's going back, over 20 years. So obviously some of those people have moved on. They've retired from the force. They're older. But
do you have statistics how many of them attended it during the last 2 years?
I do not, and I hesitate to give you a number. The problem we see is on the back end. So again, and I can't say enough positive about the human capital in Ukraine and the quality of your young officers and young soldiers who've attended these various different trainings, to include in the United States.
Well, let's just hope that there is more willingness from Ukrainian senior military officials to attend these trainings. Colonel, unfortunately, we're running out of time. I thank you very much for coming and talking to us. We were discussing the much-needed defense reforms in Ukraine with Colonel Ted Donnelly, Chief of Black Sea Eurasia Division, Policy and Strategy Directorate of U.S. European Command. I'm Vladimir Solhub. Thank you for watching Viewpoint.